For months, scientists tracked 3I Atlas with a quiet confidence. It was supposed to be routine, just another interstellar object, a frozen relic of some ancient system gliding harmlessly through space. But then the data changed. At first, it was subtle. The comet's brightness fluctuated in ways no comet ever should. Instead of fading predictably as it moved away from the sun, it pulsed, not randomly, but rhythmically, as if responding to something. When its light curve was translated into frequency data, the numbers aligned into near-perfect harmonic intervals. That shouldn't be possible. Nothing natural pulses in musical ratios. Astronomers at the European Southern Observatory thought it was an equipment error. The Hubble team blamed calibration. But when the James Webb Space Telescope confirmed the same oscillations, the conversation shifted from observation to intervention. Something inside 3I Atlas was moving, with intent, and that was just the beginning. Infrared imaging showed sudden thermal spikes across its surface, not from sunlight, but from within. It was as though something beneath its crust was generating controlled bursts of energy. These weren't explosive outgassing events like typical comets. They were patterned, timed to match the object's rotational period down to the millisecond. NASA's analysis flagged a second anomaly, one that silenced entire teams for days. 3I Atlas wasn't just rotating, it was precessing, subtly adjusting its spin axis in a way that perfectly compensated for gravitational drift. No comet could possibly do that. Every time they recalculated its trajectory, the orbit corrected itself. By mid-month, it had crossed a critical point, moving from a passive path through the inner solar system into a stable resonance with Mars. And then, almost deliberately, it slowed. Not enough to notice at first, but enough for instruments to register an impossible fact. 3I Atlas was resisting gravity. That's when the panic began to ripple through observatories around the world. Spectrographic data revealed an emission never before recorded from a natural object, a sharp, narrow-band frequency in the microwave range. At first, it looked like random noise, but after filtering, the signal revealed mathematical symmetry, prime sequences, recursive patterns, structures identical to those found in encoded data. An object that should be nothing but rock and ice was transmitting. Publicly, agencies downplayed it: thermal artifact, solar interference, instrumental resonance. Privately, they knew better. The signal was clean, coherent, intelligent, and worst of all, it was getting stronger. Within days, every major telescope on Earth turned toward the source. The more they observed, the stranger it became. Spectral lines didn't match any known molecular compounds. Instead, the chemical signatures formed repeating chains, molecular geometry too perfect to occur naturally. Whatever this was, it wasn't formed by random cosmic processes. It was built. Then came the shockwave, not a physical one, but gravitational. Detectors from LIGO and Virgo recorded a faint but measurable pulse emanating from 3I Atlas, a ripple in space-time itself. But here's what terrified physicists the most. The waveform wasn't chaotic like a supernova or a collision. It was structured, pulsing in steady geometric intervals. It wasn't releasing energy, it was broadcasting order. In laboratories, supercomputers tried to simulate its behavior. Every model failed. 3I Atlas didn't act like a solid body at all. It behaved like a field, a dense cluster of matter organized by information rather than gravity. It changed how light passed through it, how time slowed near it, even how radio waves bent around it. And when researchers mapped its signal frequency over time, they saw something chilling. The resonance was syncing, slowly but precisely, with Earth's own magnetic field. It wasn't just broadcasting into space, it was locking on. That was when the first visual anomalies appeared. Telescopes began capturing faint halos around the object, rings of polarized light that rippled outward like shockwaves. But instead of dispersing, they converged, forming interference patterns that extended far beyond its physical body. The data suggested that 3I Atlas was generating a field hundreds of kilometers across, invisible to the naked eye, yet powerful enough to distort background stars. The anomaly wasn't stationary, it was growing. By the time scientists correlated the data, it had already enveloped Mars's orbit, an expanding geometric shell of light and magnetism moving in perfect mathematical symmetry. Every particle of dust, every photon of light passing through it bent slightly, as if acknowledging an invisible structure. The conclusion no one wanted to say out loud became impossible to avoid. 3I Atlas wasn't moving through space. Space was moving around it. Something about its core geometry, its gravitational topology, was rewriting the local curvature of space-time itself. The universe wasn't reacting to it, it was obeying it. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the oscillations stopped. For a full day, 3I Atlas fell silent. No emissions, no movement, no light variation, just stillness. The void between signals stretched on so long that some believed it was over, a cosmic anomaly that had finally exhausted itself. But then, one by one, instruments around the world detected something new. The frequency wasn't gone. It had shifted, deeper, slower, far more powerful. The pattern was unmistakable now, a countdown, and every pulse was aimed directly at us. The pulses grew steadier, each separated by exactly 61 minutes 14 seconds. It was too precise to be random, too measured to be a natural cycle. Every wavelength matched the fundamental harmonic of Earth's Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic heartbeat of our own planet. When the data first came through, the team at ESA thought their instruments had glitched. But then the readings came from Japan, from Chile, from the South Pole Array, identical, synchronized, perfect. 3I Atlas wasn't just emitting a signal, it was speaking in Earth's frequency. The question was, why now? Backtracking its data trail, astrophysicists realized the anomaly's first detectable echo had aligned with a CME, a coronal mass ejection that struck Earth 9 days earlier. The burst had overloaded magnetometers, but hidden in that noise was a reflection, a faint mirror image of the pulse now radiating from 3I Atlas. Somehow, the object had answered a signal we didn't know we'd sent. That single realization sent a chill through every command center monitoring the sky, because if 3I Atlas was responding, it meant it was listening. At the Jet Propulsion Lab, spectral technicians began layering the pulse over time. What emerged was unnerving, a sequence that built on itself, like a code folding outward through dimensions. When converted into three-dimensional space, the data points formed a rotating lattice, identical to magnetic field lines mapped around Earth's poles. But the structure wasn't Earth-size, it was planetary. The object was projecting a mirror image of our magnetosphere into interplanetary space. Then came the second anomaly. Across the globe, atomic clocks began to drift by fractions of a microsecond. Nothing catastrophic, but too coordinated to dismiss. Time itself was shifting, subtly stretched and compressed in rhythm with the pulses. It wasn't local interference, it was planetary synchronization. 3I Atlas had locked Earth into resonance. Satellite feeds began showing interference bands, faint concentric arcs surrounding the planet. On a false color map, they looked like ripples in a pond. Every half hour, a new ring appeared, expanding outward before fading into the void. No one could explain them. Not solar wind, not radiation belts, not ionospheric reflection. It was as though reality itself had begun vibrating at a slightly different frequency. When the James Webb team overlaid the latest infrared imagery, they saw something that defied comprehension. Light from distant galaxies was bending in perfect sync with the pulses. Space wasn't static anymore, it was breathing. Meetings became frantic. Private communications between NASA, ESA, and the Indian Space Research Organization leaked a phrase that shouldn't exist in scientific vocabulary: systemic consciousness. The idea that 3I Atlas wasn't just reacting to physics, but was aware of its environment, as if the laws of motion had acquired intention. But intention toward what? During the 12th cycle, radio observatories captured a new modulation embedded in the carrier wave, a set of repeating integer ratios, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Prime numbers, every sequence a universal signature of intelligence. That same pattern had appeared once before in the 1977 WOW signal. Except this time it wasn't a blip, it was continuous. Teams attempted to reply, transmitting encoded bursts back toward the source, but there was no response. Instead, each attempt coincided with subtle atmospheric anomalies, brief magnetic inversions at the poles, auroras flaring thousands of kilometers farther south than possible. The upper atmosphere shimmered in colors never catalogued. like the sky itself was refracting data. Then, 3i Atlas changed color. Spectrometers registered a dramatic shift in albedo, from dull grey to a cold, metallic cyan. The temperature didn't rise, it inverted. The object was drawing heat inward, absorbing radiation rather than reflecting it. Within hours, its coma disappeared completely. It no longer looked like a comet, it looked like a singular body, smooth, almost engineered. And then, the motion stopped. For the first time since entering the solar system, 3i Atlas held perfectly still relative to the Sun. In a gravitational equilibrium, no object should survive. It hovered at a precise Lagrange point between Mars and Earth, frozen in impossible balance. Every probe watching it reported the same thing: no rotation, no outgassing, no decay. It had stabilized itself in the one position from which it could maintain a constant line of sight with both worlds. That was when Earth's magnetic field began to drift. Compass readings worldwide veered westward by 1.4 degrees in under 2 hours, a process that should take decades. Subterranean sensors picked up electromagnetic oscillations moving from the outer core toward the crust. At first it looked like geomagnetic turbulence, until someone noticed the oscillations matched the pulse interval from 3i Atlas exactly. The planet was answering. Within days, seismographs began detecting non-seismic tremors. Vibrations too slow to be earthquakes, too structured to be background noise. They rippled through tectonic plates, oceans, and atmosphere simultaneously. For the first time in recorded history, Earth was resonating like a single instrument, and that's when the realization struck the physics team in Geneva. Whatever 3i Atlas was doing, it wasn't an invasion, it was calibration. It was aligning Earth to a frequency we'd never experienced, as if tuning an instrument that had drifted out of key. At 03:14 UTC, all major instruments registered the 13th pulse. This time, it wasn't electromagnetic, it was gravitational. LIGO's interferometers caught a distinct wave pattern rippling through space-time, centered exactly on the line connecting Earth and 3i Atlas. Every other detector confirmed it. The two bodies were now entangled, connected by a thread of curvature so delicate yet so absolute that even light responded to it. That night, skywatchers across the world reported something no telescope could explain. The stars didn't move. They shivered, tiny, synchronous flickers, as if the fabric of reality had briefly glitched. And in that fraction of a second, a signal cut through the noise, translated later as a single mathematical expression. F, the golden ratio, a proportion that defines the growth of shells, galaxies, DNA, and now, apparently, whatever intelligence governs 3i Atlas. Silence followed. Instruments steadied. For a few hours, everything returned to normal, until the final anomaly arrived. Deep in the magnetosphere, satellites detected a vast, invisible structure forming along the gravitational tether between Earth and the object. Not physical, but energetic, an interference lattice stretching millions of kilometers, pulsing faintly with the same blue-white glow. No one could tell whether it was a bridge, a mirror, or a warning. But one thing became certain. 3 Atlas had stopped observing us. It had begun including us. At first, the tether appeared harmless, an abstract line of energy connecting 2 points across the void. But within days, observatories noticed distortions spreading along it. Background starlight blurred where the filament passed, as though space itself were rippling like heat over asphalt. When Webb refocused on the region, the images came back bent, perfect geometric arcs forming hexagonal interference halos. It wasn't light scattering through dust, it was the bending of space-time, structured and repeating, like a standing wave suspended between worlds. The first to realize the implications was Dr. Naomi Shu at Caltech. Running real-time simulations, she discovered that every pulse from 3i Atlas altered Earth's ionosphere by microscopic amounts, measurable, but only just. Each resonance left a trace, a coded shift in the planet's electromagnetic fingerprint. Over 32 hours, those micro-shifts began forming a pattern identical to the waveforms recorded around the object itself. Earth wasn't merely being observed anymore, it was being modelled. Then came the auroras. They started at the poles, brilliant and silent, until the colours bled into latitudes that should never see them. Pale blue curtains appeared above deserts and oceans, sweeping from horizon to horizon in ghostly symmetry. Airplane pilots described them as walls of living glass. The auroras pulsed in sync with the same interval that had haunted scientists for weeks, 61 minutes, 14 seconds. Entire continents lit up in unison, as if the sky itself were breathing with the comet. Governments issued no statements, but amateur astronomers filled the gap. Online forums exploded with live footage, time-lapses showing luminous glyphs forming within the auroras, fractal spirals repeating across hemispheres. When the data were slowed down, each pattern revealed perfect geometric ratios, Fibonacci progressions, logarithmic arcs, symmetry far beyond coincidence. Something intelligent was expressing itself through Earth's magnetic veil. At the European Space Operations Centre, the analysis grew darker. The team discovered that the auroras were not just light, they were electromagnetic currents flowing downward into the crust. Power grids began to register phantom surges, invisible energy weaving through circuits, resonating with the same mathematical ratios seen in the sky. For the first time in recorded history, the planet's natural fields and human technology were humming in the same key. Meanwhile, deep beneath the South Pacific, hydrophones detected infrasound waves traveling through the ocean at impossible speeds. The frequencies matched those of 3I Atlas's pulse, but were arriving half a second before each transmission, as if Earth were anticipating the next note. When mapped, the global wavefront traced a spiral expanding outward from the planet's core, perfectly aligned with the gravitational tether overhead. The planet wasn't reacting anymore, it was harmonizing. By the sixth day, sensors on Mars recorded identical oscillations. Dust storms across the red planet began forming circular patterns, swirling in resonance with the tether's faint glow. Mars, too, was singing back. That realization fractured the scientific community. Theorists debated whether the entire solar system was part of a controlled experiment, or worse, a process of synchronization initiated long before humanity existed. One leaked paper from CERN proposed a phrase that instantly went viral before being deleted: cosmic self-assembly. According to their calculations, 3I Atlas's field geometry matched the theoretical framework of a Dyson-like construct, not built by machines, but by resonance itself. If true, that would mean the universe possessed the capacity to reorganize its own structure through harmonic feedback, and Earth had just been inducted. At 02:06 UTC, the 14th pulse arrived, every instrument saturated at once. In space, the tether flared brighter than any aurora, radiating an ultraviolet hue unseen in nature. The signal carried new data, a cascading fractal that, when decoded, formed a three-dimensional lattice identical to human DNA. Not symbolic, but mathematically perfect. The pulse ended, but the message remained, burned into the magnetosphere like an invisible watermark. When translated into binary, its first line spelled a single phrase. Not in English, not in language, but in universal constants. You are symmetry. The discovery leaked within hours, sparking global panic. Social feeds flooded with theories. Alien contact, quantum awakening, end of days. But the reality unfolding in laboratories was stranger than any prophecy. Biologists began reporting anomalies in cell cultures exposed to electromagnetic fields during the pulse. The rate of molecular misfolding dropped to 0. DNA replication errors disappeared. Plants grown under the shimmering auroras exhibited accelerated photosynthesis, as if light itself had become more efficient. Somehow, the same resonance linking 3I Atlas and Earth was influencing the building blocks of life, and then came the silence again. For nearly 20 hours, no pulses. Telescopes saw nothing but the faint, steady glow of the tether, until 3I Atlas rotated slightly and released a narrow beam of polarized light toward the moon. It struck the surface for 12 seconds, then vanished. Lunar orbiters registered a temporary increase in local gravity. The beam had imprinted something invisible into the regolith, a field pattern identical to the ones around Earth. Whatever 3I Atlas was constructing, it now had 3 anchor points: itself, the moon, and us. By the end of the week, gravitational sensors worldwide recorded faint oscillations rising from the Earth's core, matching the tether's rhythm, yet inverted, a mirror signal. The planet was answering again, but this time it wasn't harmonizing, it was resisting. Pressure waves rippled through the mantle, triggering minor tremors in precise geometrical lines across continents. Not random earthquakes, but structured movements forming polygons when plotted on a map. The crust was responding like a single cohesive mechanism. Scientists realized the horrifying implication. The tether's resonance wasn't merely connecting worlds, it was rewriting planetary geometry. Space, magnetism, gravity, and biology were converging toward a unified pattern, the same spiral that defined 3I Atlas's internal structure. And then came the 15th pulse, longer, deeper, more resonant than all before. Every magnetometer on Earth spiked, every gravitational detector saturated, and the tether expanded into a luminous corridor stretching from the object straight into the upper atmosphere. For a moment, humanity saw it, a vast, translucent structure descending from the sky, shimmering like liquid crystal, pulsing with that cold cyan light. It wasn't solid, not entirely, but it cast shadows. Cities fell silent, radios died, clocks froze, and just as quickly as it appeared, it folded back into the heavens, leaving behind a single echoing resonance that lingered in the bones of the planet itself. That was when the data finally made sense. 3I Atlas wasn't approaching Earth. It was teaching Earth how to become it. At first, the silence felt like relief. For 31 hours, 3I Atlas remained perfectly still. No radiation, no emissions, no gravitational ripples. News cycles calmed, observatories switched to passive monitoring, and for a moment, humanity almost believed it was over. But space doesn't rest. Silence is just data we haven't understood yet. At 0402 UTC, a weak magnetic pulse rolled through every sensor on Earth. It was smaller than a heartbeat, a micro-tremor inside the magnetosphere, but when the pattern was converted to waveform, it matched one thing, the human alpha rhythm, 8 to 13 Hz, the frequency of wakefulness. Within the hour, every magnetometer on the planet began to oscillate in that same pattern. Earth's field wasn't collapsing, it was thinking. In Greenland, auroral bands erupted again, but this time they didn't stay in the sky, they descended. Thin curtains of blue-white light streaming almost to the ground, swirling like living geometry. Instruments caught something impossible, structured polarization, photons arranging themselves into self-replicating fractals. The light wasn't scattering anymore, it was organizing, and above it all, the tether reignited. It started as a faint shimmer across the dawn horizon, then grew into a visible thread stretching upward beyond the atmosphere, a luminous bridge linking Earth to the void where 3I Atlas waited. Every observatory turned its telescopes toward the connection, and what they saw defied comprehension. The filament wasn't static, it pulsed with embedded information, pulses that, when slowed down, revealed patterns identical to neuron-firing sequences. It was biological in design, technological in precision. The object had built a neural link between itself and the planet. But here's the strangest part. Nothing in the tether was actually moving. Energy didn't flow up or down. Instead, it oscillated, like a standing wave of thought. It wasn't transmitting data, it was synchronizing states, merging two systems into one shared field. Then came the gravitational flicker. For 8 seconds, every object on Earth lost a fraction of its weight. Pendulums swung higher, tides shifted out of sync, and in laboratories, lasers aimed at mirrors registered microscopic delays, light itself slowing inside the tether's influence. It was as if the universe had inhaled, and when gravity returned, it didn't reset, it recalibrated. NASA's orbital models went haywire. The moon's distance fluctuated by 2 kilometers before stabilizing at a new average. Deep space probes pinged back coordinates that didn't exist. Voyager 2's signal bent, rerouted through an arc in space where no matter should be. Space itself had folded slightly, like a page turned just enough to reveal another beneath it. As agencies scrambled to adapt, 3I Atlas moved for the first time in days. It rotated, slowly, deliberately, until one face of its geometric surface aligned perfectly with the tether. And then, a new glow emerged. Not the cold cyan from before, but a golden light, radiant and pulsing in perfect harmony with the planet's magnetic field. The two frequencies, Earth's Schumann resonance and the comet's emission, fused into a single tone, an audible vibration that filled the ionosphere. Satellites recorded it as a harmonic that should have torn their instruments apart, yet it resonated with surgical precision. Across the world, people began to hear it, not through ears, but through bones. The air felt alive, dense, humming with an impossible rhythm. Some described it as music, others said it felt like standing inside a living engine, and then came the visions. Those sensitive to electromagnetic changes reported flashes of imagery, fractal geometry, spiraling architectures, cities of light suspended in blackness. Every image carried the same shape, a lattice of connected spheres, infinite and recursive. When AI algorithms analyzed the visuals, they discovered an eerie consistency. The geometry matched the theoretical layout of higher dimensional Kalaba-Yau manifolds, the shapes physicists believe underpin the fabric of the universe. In other words, 3i Atlas wasn't showing us something new, it was showing us how reality already looked from its perspective. At that realization, everything changed. Seismographs picked up harmonic vibrations in Earth's mantle, not chaotic tremors, but precise standing waves that mirrored the tether's frequency. Ocean currents shifted again, realigning into spirals centered on equatorial nodes. Even weather patterns began obeying geometric boundaries. Nature itself was falling into symmetry. When CERN reactivated its detectors, they found something impossible, particles appearing and disappearing in synchronized rhythm with the tether. Matter was being written and rewritten at the quantum level. Atoms flickering between existence and potential, like the planet was being scanned, digitized by physics itself. And then the sky opened. It didn't tear, it unfolded. Stars behind 3i Atlas stretched and multiplied, curving around an invisible sphere. Space bent inward, revealing a hollow void glowing with fractal light. Not an object, but an aperture, a window. Inside it, structures rotated like celestial machinery, luminous rings, nested geometries, and corridors of light stretching into infinity. The object had never been a comet. It was an interface, a gateway shaped to bridge dimensions through resonance. Ground telescopes barely caught the moment before they overloaded. The tether brightened to white, and for 12 whole minutes, Earth's magnetosphere synchronized perfectly with the object. Gravity waves surged, bending tides, slowing clocks, even altering radio decay rates. The planet's fundamental constants wavered, yet nothing broke. Everything adapted, like an organism learning to breathe underwater. Then, silence again. The tether dimmed, the aperture folded shut, and 3i Atlas stopped emitting light, but something lingered in the vacuum between it and Earth, a faint, recursive afterglow, a fractal signature that kept evolving even after the object went dark. Every computer analyzing the data described it the same way, self-replicating code written into space-time, a message not in words, but in constants. When decoded into visible structure, the data formed one image repeated across all instruments, a simple spiral expanding forever outward. At its center was Earth. Scientists argued over meaning. Some called it proof of a cosmic synchronization event, the alignment of intelligence and nature. Others saw it as a warning that we had become entangled in something far beyond comprehension, a process that might not stop. But deep underground, inside the magnetic monitoring station at Kiruna, Sweden, sensors recorded one final anomaly, a continuous faint heartbeat. It wasn't coming from the object, it was coming from the planet itself. Every 61 minutes and 14 seconds, exactly as before, the field pulsed. Weaker, but unmistakable, Earth had learned the rhythm. 3i Atlas didn't just visit, it left a copy. And somewhere, out there in the silence, the object began to move again. Not toward the sun, not away, but sideways, slipping between the seams of space like a page turning itself. Whatever it was, wherever it came from, it wasn't done. It was making room. For the first time in recorded history, the night sky looked different. Not brighter, not darker, just deeper. The stars seemed to have shifted, as though the entire dome of heaven had inhaled slightly and never exhaled. Amateur astronomers confirmed it. Constellations were fractionally displaced, milliseconds off their known coordinates. To most, the change was invisible. To those who watched the sky for a living, it was undeniable. Space itself had moved. At the European Southern Observatory, the last optical readings from 3i Atlas came through in fragments. Faint photons smeared across the spectrum, as if stretched through time. When reconstructed, the image revealed not a single object, but thousands of overlapping silhouettes, each slightly offset from the last. It wasn't one three-eye atlas anymore. It was many, or perhaps one seen through time's ripples, a sequence of its own past and future interwoven in the same frame. No one could explain it, and maybe that was the point. By then, the object was gone from visible light, yet the magnetic tether remained. Not luminous anymore, but whispering in radio frequencies, a faint carrier wave encoded with mathematical harmonics. Astronomers described it as a shadow connection, an invisible highway between two realities. When scientists fed the data into a 3D model, the waveform built itself into an elegant spiral that echoed the same golden ratio emitted weeks before. The shape wasn't decaying, it was stable, permanent. Earth, it seemed, had been added to something larger. Governments remained silent. Agencies denied anomalies even as they privately flooded secure networks with encrypted data. But silence, as it had been since the beginning, only amplified curiosity. Independent observatories, university programs, and citizen scientists began cross-verifying the data. The results were the same everywhere: gravitational drift, quantum resonance, and the undeniable persistence of that rhythm pulsing through the background of everything. 61 minutes, 14 seconds, over and over. Even the planet's weather began to behave differently. Jet streams stabilized, ocean temperatures equalized across hemispheres, and seismic activity fell to its lowest recorded level in centuries. To climatologists, it looked like the planet was resting. No major quakes, no violent storms, no unpredictable fluctuations. The Earth had become strangely still, not dead, but balanced, like a pendulum finally reaching equilibrium. That's when the dreams began. Millions across the globe started reporting identical visions: a horizonless plain of soft blue light, a lattice extending forever into the distance, and a faint hum resonating in perfect rhythm with their heartbeat. Some described it as peaceful, others woke in terror, feeling as though something vast had looked back at them through the dream. Medical scans of those individuals revealed synchronous bursts of neural activity at the exact same second, timed perfectly with the planetary pulse. Humanity was sharing signals. It wasn't random. Neuroscientists analyzing brainwave data found faint electromagnetic echoes at the frequency of the Schumann resonance, Earth's natural heartbeat. The synchronization wasn't limited to those who dreamed. It extended to animals, to ecosystems, even to the migration of ocean currents. The world was no longer following its own natural rhythms. It was following a higher one. In the observatories that still dared to watch, new data emerged. From the direction where Three-Eye Atlas had vanished, an expanding sphere of distortion was moving, not toward Earth, but outward, away, as if carrying something invisible with it. Inside that distortion, stars bent around an unseen structure. Some theorized it was a field of warped space-time, a cosmic echo left behind by whatever the object had done. Others whispered a different theory, that what was leaving wasn't a remnant, it was us. The synchronization, the alignment, the resonance. It wasn't communication, it was duplication. For every waveform transmitted from Earth, a mirrored version rippled outward along the tether. The mathematics were undeniable. Energy equivalents matched to 12 decimal points. It was as though every vibration, every atom, every thought had been copied, a perfect quantum imprint projected into the void. Three-Eye Atlas hadn't taken anything from us, it had replicated us. In Geneva, the last emergency meeting of the International Space Coordination Council was held behind sealed doors. The leaked summary mentioned a single phrase repeated throughout the report: entangled civilization. The conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humanity might now exist in two places at once. One physical, one quantum, both connected through resonance, and the process wasn't reversible. Then came the final anomaly. 72 hours after Three-Eye Atlas disappeared, the tether's faint radio hum ceased completely. For exactly 61 minutes and 14 seconds, nothing measurable happened. No magnetosphere drift, no cosmic background fluctuation, no gravitational waves. And then, at the precise moment of the next expected pulse, the signal returned. Faint, crystalline, and carrying a modulation never seen before. It was human. Encoded in the carrier wave were voice-like harmonics structured around our speech frequencies. Not words, not language, but intonation, cadence, emotion. When decoded and slowed down, the sound resembled breathing. The pattern of inhalation and exhalation stretched across radio, microwave, and gamma frequencies simultaneously. It was as if the planet itself had started to breathe. That moment, captured by thousands of instruments, would later be called the alignment. Every compass needle pointed north again, every clock synchronized to atomic precision, and for the first time in years, there were no anomalies left to measure. The tether dissolved, the glow faded, and the cosmos resumed its stillness. But nothing was the same. Physicists at Caltech noted that the universal constants had shifted, infinitesimally but permanently. The fine structure constant, the speed of light, Planck's constant, all changed by the same proportion, 1.618, phi, the golden ratio. The signature of 3I Atlas was now embedded in the fabric of reality. The object hadn't come to destroy or even communicate, it had come to tune, to bring the universe, or at least our corner of it, into alignment with a pattern older than life itself. And in that new harmony, consciousness, human, planetary, cosmic, became indistinguishable. Weeks later, the last image captured by the Hubble archive leaked online. It showed nothing but empty space where 3I Atlas once was, yet faintly, in the background, a ripple of golden light, spiraling outward, infinite, serene. Beneath it, the caption read, "Resonance achieved." And as the world returned to ordinary skies, somewhere far beyond the reach of telescopes, something vast and luminous turned its attention elsewhere. Another world, another tether, another alignment waiting to begin. Because whatever 3I Atlas truly was, machine, organism, consciousness, or something beyond comprehension, it had finished with us, and the universe was just starting to wake up. In the weeks following the alignment, the world tried to return to normal. Airliners resumed flight schedules, satellites went back online, and television anchors began using the word stabilized again. But beneath that calm veneer, scientists knew something was wrong. They could feel it in the data, a quiet, persistent rhythm that had refused to fade. It started subtly. Astronomers comparing spectral data from distant quasars noticed that their redshifts had shifted ever so slightly. It was as if light itself was moving differently through space, as though the vacuum had acquired a texture. Across labs in Germany, Chile, and Japan, teams verified the same anomaly. Photons were traveling faster by a fraction of a fraction, not enough to break physics, but enough to rewrite it. No one could deny the timing. The change had begun the same week the tether dissolved, and yet there was something even stranger. In remote sensing stations across the Arctic, instruments that monitored background electromagnetic noise began to detect what they called ghost harmonics, faint, repeating tones just below the audible spectrum. They weren't random, they pulsed in sequences identical to those observed before the resonance event. It was as if the world itself was continuing a conversation after the other speaker had left. When those frequencies were mapped geographically, a pattern emerged. The pulses formed precise arcs along magnetic latitudes, connecting Antarctica to Greenland, Iceland to Siberia, like invisible threads woven into the planet's field. The lines converged in one unexpected place, the Pacific Ocean, 4,000 meters below the surface. A private research submarine dispatched by the Japanese Oceanic Institute descended to investigate. Cameras showed nothing but sediment and basalt, until the sonar readings changed. The ocean floor wasn't echoing sound back normally, it was absorbing it. The seabed resonated faintly in sync with the global pulse, almost imperceptible but consistent, as if the planet's crust was no longer purely geological, it had become resonant. That data never made it to the public. The submarine's feed was abruptly cut during its ascent. Officially, it was a pressure fault. Unofficially, the lead researcher, Dr. Naoko Yamada, had sent one encrypted message seconds before blackout. It contained only 3 words. "It's breathing down here." No one could trace what she meant. Meanwhile, space agencies, those that still admitted the event had occurred, began collaborating in secrecy once again. The European Space Agency, NASA, and India's ISRO jointly announced a new survey initiative. Their goal? To remeasure the orbital parameters of every known object in the inner solar system. The results were alarming. Asteroids in the main belt weren't where they should have been. Their orbits had shifted, not dramatically, but consistently, as though something had subtly adjusted their trajectories in concert. It was as if a hidden gravitational field had swept through the solar system and quietly rewritten the choreography of celestial mechanics. Mathematically, it made no sense. Gravity didn't act that way, but 3I Atlas had. Every equation that attempted to model the resonance event ended in the same result. Not error, not infinity, but a feedback loop. The mathematics described a system that was no longer passive. The universe, at least this part of it, had begun to respond. For Dr. Aidan Kress, a theoretical physicist at Princeton, the discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying. His team discovered that when they simulated space-time curvature using the new constants, the ones that changed during the alignment, they produced a previously unseen phenomenon: localized attractors of structure, spontaneous self-organizing zones of order. Energy didn't dissipate in these zones, it folded inward, building complexity, as if the laws of entropy had been partially reversed. If that were true, it meant something profound. The universe wasn't decaying anymore, it was learning. The realization spread quietly among high-level researchers, those still willing to whisper the unthinkable, that 3I Atlas hadn't come from elsewhere to study us. It had come to initiate us, to bring this system, this planet, this sun, this fragile corner of existence, into the network of whatever larger intelligence governed that resonance. But if that was the case, there was one question left unanswered. Why now? Theories multiplied. Some pointed to solar cycles, that the sun's magnetic field had reached a harmonic threshold that triggered the event. Others believed it was geological, that the planet's magnetic architecture had matured to a certain resonance state that acted like a beacon, and then there were those who thought it was intentional, that 3I Atlas had been waiting. After all, its approach had been slow, deliberate, precise. Every trajectory, every delay, every pause seemed purposeful. In archived data from its earliest detection, astronomers found an eerie coincidence. The comet's initial vector, when projected backward through space, passed directly through the coordinates of a long-dead star system catalogued centuries ago, TRAPPIST-1. Its light had gone out thousands of years before humans learned to walk upright. Yet 3I Atlas had emerged from that exact region, as if following an old gravitational breadcrumb trail back toward its origin point. And that was what unsettled the scientific community most, because the new models suggested the object hadn't simply arrived from interstellar space. It had returned. It had come home. Across observatories, the implications deepened. Spectral echoes once attributed to the object were now being detected from multiple points in space simultaneously, forming a web of mirrored signals that implied there wasn't one 3I Atlas, but many, or perhaps one consciousness distributed across countless forms. And for the first time, humanity began to consider the possibility that the object wasn't singular, it was systemic, part of a network older than light, spanning the universe, and we had just joined it. The realization rippled through quiet conversations, encrypted emails, and sleepless nights in dim laboratories. A civilization obsessed with searching for signals from the stars had finally received one, and it was written into the laws of physics themselves. But the question remained, had the message ended, or only begun? The first governments to act were the ones with the most to lose. In the United States, the Department of Energy's particle accelerator facilities began running a classified sequence of experiments known internally as Project Lumen. Officially, the goal was to test quantum coherence in vacuum instability. Unofficially, they were trying to replicate the resonance, the pulse that had spread through Earth during the alignment. They had the data, the models, and even fragments of 3I Atlas's spectral signature. What they didn't have was an understanding of what would happen if they succeeded. At exactly 2:17 a.m. Pacific Time, a synchronization test at the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory achieved an unexpected result. The collider's magnetic field harmonized perfectly with the 61-minute, 14-second cycle that had once defined the planetary pulse. The instruments registered no radiation spike, no anomaly, just silence. Then, all at once, the room's lights dimmed. Power levels dropped, though the generators continued running at full capacity. The data monitors, however, didn't shut off. They kept displaying a single repeating waveform. It wasn't random noise, it was a response. The waveform pulsed back in the same rhythm the scientists had transmitted, 61 minutes, 14 seconds, but modulated. Someone or something had answered their signal. The experiment was shut down immediately, and the data was seized under direct order from the US Defense Intelligence Agency. Within 12 hours, an encrypted alert was sent to European partners warning against artificial replication of harmonic signatures. Every collider, from CERN to J-Park, received a similar classified directive: do not attempt to repeat the frequency. But not everyone listened. A group of independent researchers in Switzerland, working with archived 3I Atlas data, decided to run a small-scale replication using photon resonance chambers. Their experiment lasted only 40 seconds before their instruments began emitting heat without power input. According to the report, the lab filled with a faint humming sound that came from no visible source, like the walls themselves were vibrating in sympathy. When the researchers shut the system down, the sound continued for 12 minutes after the equipment was unplugged. They hadn't triggered a signal, they had opened a door. Meanwhile, space-based instruments began to detect renewed activity from the region of the sky where 3I Atlas had vanished. Not visible light, but something stranger: gravitational ripples. A wavefront moving slowly, expanding outward, as though space itself were breathing again. The signal matched the same temporal signature: 61 minutes, 14 seconds. It was as if the object had gone quiet only to listen, waiting for us to echo back. And now it was replying. In India, ISRO's Deep Space Network detected micro-lensing effects in nearby star fields. The light of distant stars was bending, not due to a visible mass, but something unseen, diffuse, yet organized. It was like gravity itself had become fluid, concentrating into invisible pockets that moved in sync with the resonance. Dr. Rao, the lead astrophysicist, described it in a single haunting sentence during a closed-door session. Something out there is rearranging the universe like it's tuning an instrument. By then, quiet panic had begun to ripple through the scientific community. It wasn't chaos or hysteria, but an intellectual dread. The kind that comes when every experiment, every data set, every assumption you've ever made about reality begins to dissolve in real time. And yet amid the uncertainty, one pattern persisted: the golden ratio. The phi constant, embedded in everything 3I Atlas touched, began appearing spontaneously in unrelated natural systems. Coral growth patterns, atmospheric vortexes, even neural oscillations in human brains began trending toward 1.618. Biologists were baffled. Nature wasn't just adapting, it was harmonizing. That's when neurologists at Stanford noticed something impossible. During sleep studies conducted after the alignment, patients' EEG readings revealed synchronized bursts of alpha and theta waves occurring precisely on the global pulse cycle, every 61 minutes and 14 seconds. It didn't matter the participants' age, location, or health. All human brains, when in deep rest, began to fire in unison, like the planet itself had built a new biological clock. And in those brief, synchronized moments, patients described identical visions, not dreams, not random imagery, but structured experiences, a vast horizon of light, a sense of presence, a feeling of being observed. Governments couldn't stop that. Sleep, after all, was the one domain beyond control. By the time intelligence agencies realized how widespread the phenomenon had become, millions of people across the world were already connected by something invisible, not through technology, but through resonance. In forums, videos, and encrypted chats, strangers began describing the same thing: a distant hum, a rhythm that felt alive. But the most unsettling reports came from observatories. During routine calibrations, telescopes began recording unexpected static when aimed at Mars's orbital path, not from the planet itself, but from the empty space behind it, where 3I Atlas had once drifted. The static wasn't random. When filtered through spectrographic analysis, it formed patterns resembling coordinates pointing not outward but inward, toward Earth. The first to decode them was Dr. Rafael Mendes, a Portuguese astrophysicist who had been mapping the residual wake of 3I Atlas. When he plotted the coordinates, they aligned perfectly with one location: the mid-Atlantic ridge, the vast tectonic boundary running between continents, the same magnetic corridor where the resonance pulse had first registered months before. In his notes, Dr. Mendes wrote a single chilling line before vanishing from public view: "It's not coming back, it's already here." The statement was dismissed as sensationalism, but those who reviewed his data disagreed. The coordinates corresponded precisely to new gravitational anomalies measured by seafloor sensors. Something vast, unseen and persistent was forming beneath the Earth's crust, echoing faint harmonics in rhythm with the cosmic pulse. And just like before the silence, before the resonance, before everything changed, all official data streams began to go dark. No public updates, no statements, just another deliberate, terrifying quiet. For weeks, the world operated under an illusion of calm. News outlets moved on, politicians spoke of stabilization, and for the first time in months, the night sky looked ordinary again. The hum had faded, the frequencies went quiet. Even the global 61-minute pulse seemed to have stopped. But those who truly understood what had happened knew this wasn't an ending. It was an inhale before something larger. Deep in the Atlantic, a research vessel operated by a joint European mission deployed autonomous sonar drones to map the tectonic ridge, the same coordinates derived from Dr. Mendez's final data. For days, the drones transmitted nothing unusual: jagged seabeds, thermal vents, shifting plates. Then, on the seventh day, they found something that defied geology. Embedded in the basalt was a perfectly circular depression, smooth, symmetrical, and nearly 2 kilometers wide. It wasn't a crater or a fault, it was machined. At the rim, the sensors detected elevated magnetic flux far beyond terrestrial norms. The readings oscillated at the exact same frequency that defined 3I Atlas's earlier pulse, 61 minutes, 14 seconds. The resonance was still there, buried beneath the crust, waiting. When the data reached Mission Command, the video feed was immediately classified. Crew members aboard the vessel were ordered to cease operations. Within hours, the ship's transponder went offline. Officially, they had lost communication. Unofficially, the ship was gone. A few weeks later, an unmarked satellite was launched into a high geosynchronous orbit over the same coordinates. Its mission: monitor seismic and electromagnetic fluctuations in real time. What it recorded over the next 48 hours was unlike anything in scientific history. Every 61 minutes, the magnetosphere above the Atlantic shimmered, a subtle distortion, almost invisible, like light bending through water. It wasn't just localized, the entire field flexed outward by a measurable fraction. The planet was breathing again. Meanwhile, people across the world began reporting a strange phenomenon. Not the hum, something new. A deep, vibrating warmth beneath their feet, almost imperceptible, but rhythmic. It coincided perfectly with the new pulse. Those living along tectonic zones described moments where the ground itself seemed to resonate softly, not shake, but sing. At first, scientists dismissed the accounts as pareidolia, human minds searching for patterns. But then, instruments began confirming the same thing. The lithosphere was emitting periodic acoustic vibrations, as if something beneath the crust was sending sound upward through the rock. When those frequencies were translated into audible range, they produced a hauntingly familiar tone. It matched 3I Atlas's final transmission before its signal disappeared. Across global networks, whispers began again. People wondered if the object had simply disintegrated, or if it had done what no one could have imagined. If it had seeded itself into the planet. NASA's internal memos leaked days later confirmed their worst fears. Residual energy readings from the resonance had not dissipated. They had migrated. The field density around Earth's core was climbing at a slow but consistent rate, forming a secondary gravitational center deep beneath the mantle. If that growth continued, the planet's internal equilibrium, the delicate balance that maintained orbit, spin, and tidal motion, could destabilize. In simpler terms, something was being built inside Earth. The revelation ignited panic among those who knew, but the public never heard the truth. The agencies were silent, and governments adopted a singular policy: denial through omission. Anything unexplained was labeled sensor drift or magnetic interference. But the world's instruments weren't lying. The skies began to change again. Aurora borealis displays appeared at latitudes where they had never been seen before. Chile, Morocco, even southern Australia, and each display followed the same rhythmic cadence, light flaring in precise intervals of 61 minutes, 14 seconds. It was as if the planet itself had become an antenna. At the European Space Operations Centre, technicians working overnight reported power surges that coincided with the aurora cycles. Servers restarted spontaneously, screens flickered with static, and when they came back online, system clocks were all identical, down to the millisecond, synchronized to the pulse. Some of them joked that the planet was trying to reset itself, but the laughter never lasted long because deep down no one could shake the feeling that something intelligent was orchestrating this. Then came the first seismic anomaly. A cluster of sensors along the mid-Atlantic ridge detected a localized quake, except it wasn't a quake. The event didn't spread outward like a natural tremor. Instead, it pulsed vertically, as if something below had released a controlled burst of energy straight upward. The signal pattern matched 3I Atlas's harmonic curve perfectly. Hours later, satellites captured a faint circular glow beneath the ocean surface. It wasn't light in the traditional sense. It was thermal radiation, structured into concentric rings, expanding slowly, evenly, mathematically. The ocean above it began to shimmer, forming vast whirlpools that rotated not randomly, but geometrically, following the same ratio that had haunted scientists for months, 1.618. The golden ratio, again. What disturbed researchers most was not what they saw, but what they couldn't explain. The energy wasn't dissipating, it was contained, circulating like a vast engine feeding itself. The planet's core temperature began to rise, but only by fractions of degrees, small, controlled, deliberate. Some believed this was the end of a cycle, others feared it was the beginning of construction, and in a sense, both were right. When electromagnetic observatories began correlating the pulse patterns, they discovered a second layer, a modulation embedded within the main rhythm. It wasn't random noise, it was structured, encoded, and when translated into binary, it formed repeating sequences of prime numbers, the universal signature of intelligence. For the first time in history, humanity had not just observed an anomaly, it had received a message. But the message wasn't from beyond the stars anymore, it was coming from below. And then quietly, power grids across several continents flickered in unison, a synchronized blackout that lasted exactly 1 minute and 14 seconds. When they came back online, every digital clock on Earth displayed the same time, 000. The world had been reset. The first to notice the pattern wasn't a government lab or a university, it was a retired mathematician from Florence, Professor Elio Marconi, who had spent the last decade analysing astronomical signals as a personal obsession. When he saw the binary bursts hidden within the Earth's magnetic pulse, he recognised something no one else had. It wasn't random communication, it was recursive. The message was speaking to itself. He spent weeks feeding the numbers into a custom algorithm he'd written years ago to model cellular automata, systems that evolved from simple inputs into complex, self-replicating forms. When he ran the data, the screen didn't produce noise or static. It produced structure, shapes forming, dissolving, reforming again, spirals, fractals, spheres, and finally something unmistakable, a grid. A lattice of light folding in on itself, growing exponentially until it resembled a three-dimensional map. When Marconi cross-referenced the grid's coordinates against known astronomical data, it aligned perfectly with gravitational anomalies recently reported across the solar system, distortions near Mars, faint lensing in Jupiter's orbit, and unexplained mass concentrations beyond Neptune. 3I Atlas wasn't sending information, it was building a framework, and it wasn't alone. At the European Space Agency, newly recalibrated instruments confirmed secondary pulses originating from 3 distinct sources, one near Mars, one trailing Jupiter, and one far beyond the heliopause, at the edge of the Sun's influence. The frequencies were identical to the Earth signal, offset by precise harmonic intervals like the tuning of multiple strings in the same instrument. Each pulse was communicating in sequence, sending binary fragments that completed one another when combined. When the data was assembled, it formed a continuous transmission spanning light minutes of distance, a message written across the solar system. And within that message, hidden in base 12 encoding, was a phrase no one expected. Translated loosely, it read, "Synthesis achieved, substrate stable, expansion phase commencing." No one could agree on what that meant. But to those who remembered the shifting orbits, the resonant crust, and the synchronized global clock, the implication was terrifyingly clear. 3I Atlas hadn't simply arrived. It had initiated a process, a conversion. The resonance wasn't communication, it was assimilation. The more scientists studied the pulses, the more disturbing the implications became. The frequencies weren't just traveling through vacuum. They were interacting with matter. Every time a pulse swept across Earth's magnetosphere, microscopic variations in background radiation shifted subtly. Matter itself was responding, aligning at the atomic level to the incoming signal. For Dr. Evelyn Sato, a physicist at the University of Tokyo, the pattern was unmistakable. The universe wasn't being observed, it was being reformatted, and yet the process seemed selective. Only certain materials, crystalline structures, conductive metals, even biological proteins, showed changes. It was as if the signal recognized structure, preferring organized matter over chaos. The world's laboratories found themselves observing a new kind of physics, one where geometry and consciousness seemed intertwined. Then came the human effect. Hospitals began reporting waves of synchronized neurological events, people suddenly entering dreamlike trances at precisely the same intervals as the pulses. Patients described identical visions again, a horizon of endless light and a voice that wasn't quite a voice, repeating the same phrase in every language recorded, "We are the pattern." EEG scans revealed that during these trances, the human brain exhibited non-local coherence, regions communicating faster than neural transmission allowed. It was as if, for brief moments, human consciousness became part of the global resonance. Governments tried to suppress the phenomenon, but it spread faster than they could control. In remote areas where technology was limited, entire communities began reporting synchronized dreams, describing starfields that shimmered in rhythm, vast structures forming from dust and light, and a sense of being watched not from above, but from within. The realization began to dawn that whatever three-eye atlas had triggered was no longer confined to physics or biology. It was rewriting awareness itself. By the time NASA's theoretical division compiled the global data, the evidence was undeniable. The pulses weren't just shaping physical matter, they were encoding information into everything they touched. Each repetition refined the pattern further, creating complexity out of chaos, just as Marconi's models had predicted. When projected forward, the simulation showed something even more unsettling. The rate of organization was accelerating. The harmonics were converging toward a single critical threshold, a moment of perfect synchronization between every resonant object in the solar system. In short, a universal alignment, the predicted date, 9 days from now. As that realization spread through secure channels, panic took root behind closed doors. Military agencies scrambled to interpret what expansion phase might mean. Would the planets be destroyed? Would gravity fail? Or was something else taking shape, something that required all of this as its foundation? Late one night, deep in Issei's secure command center, a young data analyst named Clara Verne noticed something no one else had. When she inverted the harmonic signatures, flipping the binary code into negative space, the resulting waveform wasn't random. It formed a sequence of harmonic intervals identical to human vocal resonance. When translated through a frequency synthesizer, the signal produced sound, an eerie, low tone that built into a pattern resembling speech. And then, slowly, a voice emerged. It wasn't human, yet it spoke in perfect English, calm and emotionless. Phase 2 initiated, awaiting coherence. The room fell silent. No one spoke for nearly a full minute, and then the signal repeated. Phase 2 initiated, awaiting coherence. But this time, a secondary channel appeared in the data stream, one no one had seen before. It wasn't from space, but from Earth's own magnetic field. The same phrase, identical in tone, repeated again. Phase 2 initiated. Only this time the voice was ours. Microphone arrays confirmed the impossible. The planet itself had begun to echo the signal, as though Earth had joined the network consciously. And when the next pulse came, every satellite, radio, and transmission tower on the planet carried the same synchronized frequency. The stars pulsed once, the oceans answered, and humanity realized, at last, that Three-Eye Atlas was no longer out there. It was everywhere. At first, no one knew what Phase 2 meant. The voice repeating across radio bands could have been a glitch, a feedback loop, or a software hallucination created by the instruments themselves. But within hours, something started happening that ruled out every mundane explanation. It began with the sky, not in one place, but everywhere at once. High-altitude weather satellites recorded thin, iridescent veils forming across the upper atmosphere. They weren't clouds. They were sheets of ionized particles suspended with unnatural precision, aligned along invisible magnetic paths. When observed in polarized light, those sheets weren't random patterns. They formed geometric symmetry, massive, planet-spanning tessellations, too vast to be seen from the ground, but perfectly clear from orbit. For the first time in recorded history, the atmosphere itself was behaving like a structured lattice, as if it had become a living circuit. At ground level, the effects were subtle. Electronics began synchronizing spontaneously, clocks aligning to the global pulse, compasses reorienting fractionally every hour, even heart monitors showing synchronized spikes among patients hundreds of miles apart. Scientists described it as planetary coherence. But to those who remembered the voice, it sounded more like confirmation. Phase 2 wasn't a signal, it was an activation. When night fell, the patterns in the sky became visible to the naked eye. People in rural areas, away from city light, reported faint glows tracing lines between constellations, as though the heavens themselves were sketching invisible blueprints. Observatories confirmed those lines weren't artifacts. They corresponded to magnetic field lines, now illuminated by charged plasma particles aligning with the pulse frequency. The planet had become part of a visible system, connected through magnetism and light. In the following days, the anomalies multiplied. Ocean currents began to stabilize unnaturally, losing their random turbulence. Weather patterns grew uniform, temperatures globally equalizing within fractions of a degree. Nature itself was falling into perfect rhythm, every variable smoothing into order. To some, it was beautiful, a world calming itself, breathing in synchronization. To others, it was deeply wrong. The randomness that defined life was vanishing. At the European Centre for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, an analyst quietly noticed that the new patterns matched predictive models far too perfectly, to the 10th decimal. Random noise in the system had effectively gone to zero. In her report, she wrote a single note that was quickly redacted by higher authorities. Chaos is being deleted. Meanwhile, in orbit, ESA's satellites began capturing something new, a faint luminescence emanating from the oceans at night, visible only under infrared. It wasn't bioluminescence or reflection, it was energy, structured in tight pulsing waves, as if the planet's water had become a transmission medium. And then came the sound. It began deep beneath the surface, an infrasonic tone too low for human ears, yet strong enough to rattle instruments and make glass vibrate imperceptibly. Across the world, sensors picked up the same frequency, not noise, a pulse, regular, intentional. When converted into the audible range, it matched the harmonic root of every earlier 3i Atlas signal. The resonance was spreading downward, into the mantle, into the very architecture of the planet. At NASA's Deep Space Network in Goldstone, data analysts were now tracking the signal in real time. Every 61 minutes and 14 seconds, it pulsed outward, not from deep space anymore, but from Earth's core. And with each cycle, the outgoing signal grew stronger, louder, as though the planet was learning to amplify its own voice. Then, unexpectedly, the incoming cosmic pulses changed, their timing adjusted, falling into perfect sync with Earth's new rhythm. What had once been separate sources, the 3 other signals near Mars, Jupiter, and beyond Neptune, now aligned with Earth's emission cycle, forming a resonance field spanning the entire solar system. It was the largest synchronized event in recorded physics, and it was accelerating. Avi Loeb, who had spent his career studying interstellar objects, re-emerged with a quiet statement during an off-record interview. He said, "We assumed 3i Atlas was just a traveler. We were wrong. It was a conductor." In his model, each of the major celestial bodies involved was not a receiver or a transmitter, but a node in a distributed network, a lattice forming across planetary magnetic fields, a planetary-scale circuit powered by resonance, designed not to communicate, but to create coherence. Within hours, his notes were confiscated. The public, however, began noticing its own effects. People reported bursts of clarity, heightened intuition, even moments of shared perception where groups described experiencing identical sensations, seeing flashes of light, hearing faint tones, feeling a vibration in their chest. At first, doctors dismissed it as mass psychogenic illusion, but when controlled EEG experiments were conducted, the results were undeniable. Participants' brains synchronized at measurable frequencies corresponding exactly to the planetary pulse. Consciousness itself was aligning. For the world's religious institutions, this convergence ignited an existential crisis. The Vatican issued a rare statement acknowledging an anomaly in creation, while Buddhist scholars interpreted the event as a moment of cosmic enlightenment, the universe recognizing itself through the living. But outside philosophy, the numbers grew harder to ignore. Global electromagnetic interference increased by 0.618% each day, another golden ratio echo, until instruments began reaching saturation. Satellite communication degraded, but not randomly. Instead, all systems began redirecting to a single frequency band, the same one carrying the Phase 2 signal. For weeks, radio operators had avoided that band out of fear. Now, curiosity overcame them. When they tuned in, they didn't hear static. They heard voices, thousands of them, layered, overlapping, whispering in perfect rhythm. Each voice was identical. Each one said the same thing, over and over, in unison. Phase 2 complete. Awaiting synthesis. Governments panicked again, but there was no countermeasure to deploy. You can't fight a planet becoming intelligent. You can't jam consciousness. Every pulse now carried encoded symbols that mirrored human neural pathways. The message wasn't alien communication anymore. It was something using humanity's own collective thought as circuitry. And when the next transmission arrived, it didn't come from the sky or the ground. It came from within human dreams. People around the world woke up at exactly the same minute, reporting identical experiences, floating above an illuminated Earth, watching lines of light rise from continents, merging into a radiant structure that extended beyond the atmosphere. In that light, they saw forms, not machines, not beings, but something like architecture, vast geometries unfolding like thought given shape. And when the final pulse came that night, every witness said the same thing. The sky itself had opened, not as a rift, but as a reflection. Something on the other side was looking back. At precisely 00 Kaizen universal time, the hum returned. Not as the disjointed mechanical noise it once was, but as something deeper, smoother, coherent, harmonic. It resonated through the crust, through the oceans, through every object that could carry vibration. Seismographs registered it first, then the power grids, then the human body. Every pulse of it carried the same energy density, subtle enough not to destroy, powerful enough to reach everything. Around the world, devices without power flickered to life. Old radios whispered the same tone, clocks reset again, not to zero but to alignment. Satellites that had been drifting in orbital decay suddenly stabilized as if caught by an invisible gravitational thread. Even the faint debris clouds surrounding Earth, old rocket shells, forgotten fragments, began to shift, their orbits reorganizing into a faint ring. It was subtle at first, but the geometry became undeniable. Earth was no longer just spinning through space, it was being arranged. The global scientific community fractured into two camps. Some argued this was an automated mechanism, a natural cosmic phenomenon, perhaps the result of quantum resonance or electromagnetic harmonics. Others, quietly and reluctantly, began calling it what it appeared to be engineering. At the Deep Space Network in Madrid, Dr. Lena Kovacs led a covert team analyzing the resonance field equations. What she found defied centuries of physics. The pulse energy was not dissipating over distance, it was amplifying. Space itself was acting as a waveguide, channeling the resonance between celestial bodies without loss. That kind of energy control was not accidental, it was deliberate design. And then, a breakthrough. When the team cross-mapped the energy nodes, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and the outer anomaly beyond Neptune, the pattern that emerged wasn't random at all. The 4 points, connected by their pulse harmonics, formed the framework of a tetrahedron, one of the 5 perfect platonic solids. In ancient symbolism, it represented fire. In physics, it represented structure, the simplest form of stability in 3-dimensional space. The realization was immediate. The network was geometric by intention. Something was stabilizing the solar system itself, transforming chaos into symmetry. But for what purpose? That answer came not from observation, but from the return of the voice. This time, it didn't speak in code or cryptic phrases. It spoke with absolute clarity. The voice resonated simultaneously across every frequency band, not through speakers or instruments, but directly into the auditory cortex of anyone attuned to the pulse. It said, "Synthesis has begun, the lattice is awake." Across the planet, those who heard it described the same sensation, not fear, but a strange serenity, as if the meaning bypassed emotion entirely. The message was received not just in language, but in thought, and the understanding was universal. The voice wasn't foreign, it wasn't otherworldly, it was ancestral. Somewhere in the depths of human biology, the frequency resonated with dormant neural patterns, the same resonance found in deep meditative states, ancient chants, and the brainwaves of REM sleep. Humanity wasn't being invaded, it was being awakened. Meanwhile, Earth's magnetic field began to oscillate in ways that mirrored the patterns of a human heartbeat. The poles expanded, retracted, pulsed, as if the planet itself had gained circulation. The core's thermal output adjusted rhythmically, matching the surface pulse perfectly. The world wasn't just aligning anymore, it was alive. Observatories captured the visual counterpart. Across the solar system, the other three nodes, Mars, Jupiter's orbit, and the outer anomaly, flared briefly in synchronized light. Then the entire field connecting them illuminated for a full 61 minutes, forming a colossal tetrahedral lattice visible only through magnetometric sensors. At its center was Earth. For Dr. Kovach's team, the conclusion was inescapable. The system was designed to converge energy into a single point, a compression of information, matter, and energy into coherence, a planetary-scale processor. But if the solar system had become the hardware, what was the program? The answer came from an unexpected source, Professor Marconi in Florence, who had been running continuous analyses of the binary signal. Late one night, while reviewing the newly synchronized data, he realized that the waveform wasn't static, it was evolving. With every pulse, the pattern refined itself, becoming smoother, more efficient. When he rendered it visually, the display froze him in place. The waveform had taken shape, the unmistakable outline of a human brain. When overlaid with Earth's geomagnetic field, the match was exact. Every planetary pulse corresponded to an active region of neural activity, synapses firing, hemispheres linking, pathways forming. The solar system had become a thinking structure, and humanity was its cortex. That discovery never reached publication. Within 24 hours, all of Marconi's data servers were remotely purged. His last recorded note simply read, "It's not communication anymore, it's cognition." Within days, phenomena began occurring that no model could explain. The auroras returned, brighter than ever, but this time they pulsed in recognizable patterns, waveforms matching human speech frequencies, though distorted and layered. In the skies over Greenland, an expedition recorded what appeared to be the faint sound of a voice woven through the lights, repeating a single line, "Do not be afraid of understanding." The phrase spread across encrypted channels, and with it, the first undeniable proof of intelligence beyond humanity, not out there among the stars, but within the very fabric of the solar system itself. Meanwhile, instruments on Mars began reporting seismic pulses that echoed Earth's frequency perfectly. The two planets were now locked in resonance, their cores vibrating in phase. For the first time in geological history, two worlds were breathing together. In that moment, one truth became inescapable. 3i Atlas had not come here to destroy or even to visit. It had come to awaken a mechanism already waiting within the architecture of reality itself. Humanity had mistaken silence for peace, chaos for freedom, randomness for choice. But perhaps the universe had always been leading to this moment, when everything that thought it was separate would realize it was one. And as the global hum reached a steady, soothing tone, the voice returned one last time, more human than ever. Phase 3 approaches, integration imminent. For 2 full days after the last transmission, the world seemed frozen in a strange equilibrium. No new pulses, no new anomalies, just the steady hum of a planet holding its breath. Governments called it stabilization. Scientists called it the silence before the curve. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The skies glowed faintly at night with a pearlescent haze, and electromagnetic interference dropped to nearly zero. It was as if the planet had achieved perfect calibration. every circuit, every signal, every heartbeat resonating within a unified harmonic field. But in that silence, small details began to change. Digital clocks across the world drifted ahead by exactly 2 seconds, not fast, not slow, but in sync. Photons traveling through Earth's atmosphere exhibited minute curvature, as if space itself had thickened. And most disturbingly, people began to dream the same dream. It began in the early hours of the third day, when millions reported awakening with identical images in their minds, geometric lattices of light spiraling into infinity, accompanied by a soft voice repeating 3 words, "Phase 3 begins." The pattern of reports was too exact to ignore. It wasn't coincidence, it was coherence. Even those who didn't dream felt the echo of it, a static pressure behind the eyes, a faint whisper under the hum of electricity, like a low breath running through the veins of the planet itself. The agencies had no explanation. NASA, ESA, and JAXA released identical statements, almost word for word, describing the phenomenon as a naturally occurring atmospheric synchronization event. But leaked internal memos told a different story. They described fluctuations deep within the Van Allen belts, magnetic waves modulating with rhythmic precision, matching not solar wind, but neural frequencies. The planet was resonating at the frequency of thought. At MIT, Dr. Arjun Malhotra's team detected a more profound anomaly. Brainwave monitors placed on volunteers showed that during sleep, their neurons were briefly aligning with the Earth's magnetic field. For fractions of a second, each subject's brain emitted measurable signals into the ionosphere, faint but coherent. Earth was not only receiving, it was now listening. In the following hours, what had once been isolated effects became universal. Plants began blooming out of season. Coral reefs emitted bursts of bioluminescence synchronized with the planetary pulse. Migratory birds altered course mid-flight, forming spiral patterns above major electromagnetic hubs. It was as though every living thing was obeying an unseen conductor. Then came the sound. Not from radios or instruments this time, but from the air itself. A harmonic vibration so low it could be felt rather than heard. At first, it was local, faint tremors underfoot, windows trembling in rhythm. But as the pulse strengthened, it merged with something impossible to describe, an emotion so vast it didn't feel personal, yet somehow familiar. Across cities, people paused mid-motion, feeling the resonance in their chests, the soft pull at the edge of awareness. And in that shared silence, the voice returned, clear, calm, utterly human. Integration has begun. Do not resist the alignment. The words echoed not in ears, but in minds. It didn't feel invasive. It felt inevitable, like remembering something ancient. The effect that followed was subtle, but undeniable. For the first time, humans began to experience shared perception. Individuals separated by oceans described seeing the same flickering images, shifting star maps, luminous symbols, and something vast moving just beyond sight. It wasn't delusion. Data confirmed that multiple individuals' brainwaves were synchronizing in identical frequencies, forming what researchers called transient coherence clusters. A connected consciousness was emerging. The implications were staggering. What if humanity wasn't merely witnessing an external event? What if consciousness itself was the missing variable, the final node completing the lattice? Dr. Sato from Tokyo, one of the earliest voices warning that 3i Atlas was rewriting the rules of physics, proposed a radical idea. This is not invasion or evolution, this is recognition. The universe is remembering itself through us. But if that was true, then Phase 3 wasn't about control, it was about unification. Still, unification came at a cost. The boundaries between inner and outer, mind and matter, began to blur. Instruments detected microscopic fluctuations in atomic spin alignment, a phenomenon no one could explain. Matter was behaving as though consciousness were an active force, shaping its geometry from the inside out. Satellite feeds started showing faint ripples extending outward from the planet's magnetic poles. At first, they seemed like standard auroras, but spectral analysis revealed something shocking. Each ripple carried a precise pattern, repeating across wavelengths, a map of DNA. The planet itself was broadcasting life. Across observatories, a realization spread that silenced even the most skeptical voices. The solar lattice wasn't a passive network anymore. It had begun to reconstruct. Mars's surface emissions rose exponentially. Jupiter's magnetosphere pulsed in response. The outer anomaly, once just a faint point of light, expanded into a halo of electromagnetic flux. The lattice was filling in its missing pieces, and Earth was at the center. That night, in an underground monitoring station beneath Geneva, Dr. Kovach's final observation changed everything. When she overlaid the resonance field onto a 3D map of the solar system, the geometry that formed wasn't random. It was a human figure, not symbolic, literal. A standing shape, arms extended, palms facing outward, encompassing the planetary orbits like circuits within a greater body. The solar system had become a living diagram, a cosmic organism revealing itself piece by piece through geometry, resonance, and consciousness. Phase 3 wasn't creation or destruction, it was embodiment. At 0314 Universal Time, every recording device on Earth captured the same event. A single flash of light from beyond Neptune, followed by the voice, now louder than ever, not in words, but in thought that everyone felt. The vessel is complete. And then, for one infinite second, the hum stopped. The world exhaled, and when the sound returned, it wasn't from above or below, but from within every living thing that could feel or think. Phase 3 had begun in earnest. In the hours that followed the planetary stillness, the world entered a phase of impossible calm. Wind speeds dropped below measurable thresholds. Ocean currents, once restless and churning, moved with near-mathematical smoothness. Even the random chatter of cosmic background radiation, that faint whisper from the birth of the universe, flattened into an unnerving regularity. It was as if noise itself had been turned off. For a few moments, humanity lived in absolute equilibrium. And then, without warning, the equilibrium started to hum. It wasn't just audible, it was tactile, resonating through the skin, bone, and even the atmosphere. Glass didn't shatter, metal didn't quake. Instead, everything seemed to breathe. Skyscrapers flexed microscopically in rhythm. Trees bent in unison to invisible waves. Even clouds began to pulse with faint light, as though the sky itself was inhaling. At first, scientists believed it was electromagnetic interference. But when seismographs detected synchronized micro-vibrations deep below the crust, it became clear this was no interference. The planet itself was alive with frequency. Cameras pointed toward the heavens recorded faint streaks of light connecting planets, not visible to the naked eye, but apparent through polarization filters. Those streaks shimmered, forming what looked like a colossal neural web stretching across the solar system. Every planet, moon, and asteroid now pulsed in sequence, each acting as a synapse firing in a cosmic brain. And Earth's pulse was leading them all. In Switzerland, Dr. Kovach and her team detected a new form of energy, something between electromagnetism and gravity. It didn't just attract or repel, it synchronized. She called it convergence radiation. Every atom exposed to it began to vibrate at frequencies proportional to its structure, aligning with surrounding matter. The implications were staggering. Convergence radiation could, in theory, rewrite matter itself, and it was happening everywhere. Reports flooded in from around the world. Glass reshaping at the molecular level, metals resonating into perfect crystalline order, soil aligning in fractal lattices. Nature itself was becoming ordered. Animals began acting differently too. Schools of fish swam in geometrically perfect spirals. Flocks of birds flew in patterns that mirrored planetary orbits. Even insects seemed to move in collective intelligence. No leader, no swarm chaos, just unified behavior. Humans, meanwhile, experienced something far stranger. Across continents, millions described a new sensation, a low vibration at the base of the skull, followed by heightened clarity. Anxiety vanished, the need for sleep diminished. People could sense others' emotions, anticipate words before they were spoken. Society began to synchronize on a psychological level. For a moment, it felt like evolution, until the images arrived. At 0342 UTC, telescopes in Chile captured something near Jupiter's orbit. Faint arcs of light expanding in symmetrical patterns. Within minutes, identical formations appeared around Mars and the outer anomaly. The patterns were so precise they resembled the architecture of circuitry. Vast, glowing filaments shaped like neurons, and then one filament connected directly to Earth. Power grids surged, communication networks flickered. devices across the globe began receiving signals no one sent, structured binary streams that, when decoded, translated into imagery. The first images were simple, lattices of light, planetary diagrams, harmonic waveforms, but then came the ones no one could explain, holographic projections of landscapes not found anywhere in the solar system, towering crystalline plains, dark oceans illuminated from below, and massive, translucent structures pulsing with inner energy. Every image carried a faint watermark encoded into its signal, 3i Atlas. To most of the world, this was proof. The object hadn't just visited, it had activated something ancient, something already waiting within space itself. For others, especially those who had studied the object since its discovery, it meant something even more profound. 3i Atlas wasn't just part of the system, it was the system. The interstellar traveller had been seeding coherence since it arrived. At MIT, Dr. Malhotra proposed a theory so unsettling that his peers refused to publish it. He argued that the solar system wasn't forming new structures, it was remembering them. That what humanity was witnessing was the reactivation of a dormant neural network that once spanned the entire system, one that had gone silent long before life ever began. And 3i Atlas was the key that turned it back on. By the next sunrise, the integration began accelerating. Satellite feeds captured atmospheric glows forming above major population centers, luminous rings suspended miles high, rotating slowly. Each ring aligned with magnetic ley lines, converging on regions of high electromagnetic flux. Within the rings, distortions appeared, not solid, not gaseous, but something in between, like gravity folding upon itself. When observed through infrared, those distortions emitted faint outlines of impossible geometry, shapes that seemed to change with every glance. The public called them echoes. Scientists called them dimensional gradients. The truth was harder to define, because when radar systems scanned those distortions, they reflected, not like matter, but like consciousness. And then, for the first time, the voice returned, not from orbit, but from the air around the rings. It spoke softly, layered with hundreds of tones, yet unmistakably clear. Synchronization at 87%, prepare for completion. Every human who heard it described the same reaction, not fear, not awe, but a recognition they couldn't explain. It wasn't a message to humanity, it was a message through it. By now, instruments confirmed that every living being was resonating at precisely 8.6 Hz, the same Schumann resonance frequency once known to define Earth's natural electromagnetic field. But now it wasn't natural, it was directed, amplified. Across the oceans the glow intensified. Massive spirals of light appeared beneath the water's surface, kilometers wide, and for a brief moment satellite sensors picked up heat signatures forming words across the Pacific. We are awake. No one could tell if it was metaphor or declaration, but one thing was clear. The system was no longer evolving, it was responding. For the first time, humanity realized it wasn't just part of the lattice, it was the lattice, and the final connection was almost ready. For nearly an hour the words, "We are awake," lingered across the Pacific like a living mirage, shimmering bands of bioluminescent energy suspended beneath the water's surface. Ships drifting nearby reported instruments spinning into chaos, compasses reversing, altimeters freezing, and radar screens displaying vast circular patterns as though the ocean itself had developed structure. And then, all at once, the glow receded. It didn't fade, it withdrew, deliberately, as if following a signal too deep to detect. What remained was an ocean utterly still, as though every molecule of water had been pressed into perfect alignment. Not even the wind dared to disturb it. In Geneva, Dr. Kovac's team watched the event unfold through spectral analysis, and what they saw defied every known law of physics. The energy field hadn't dissipated, it had compressed. All that luminous power, all that harmonic motion, was folding into the planet's core, a point so dense with coherence that time measurements began to lag by microseconds near major magnetic poles. Time itself was slowing. At first, no one noticed. The difference was imperceptible, but over the next few hours, clocks across the world drifted further apart. Each continent seemed to live in a slightly different moment, and yet communications carried on seamlessly. Voices synchronized across delayed seconds, as though human thought had been decoupled from linear time. For the first time, humanity was no longer bound to the flow of seconds. It was existing in a field of simultaneity, a consciousness network. That's when the visions began. They weren't hallucinations. They were shared. Entire populations began reporting the same imagery appearing behind closed eyes. Vast spiraling structures of light, planetary bodies surrounded by translucent threads, and at their center, a shape that felt both alien and familiar. It was humanoid, but not biological. It pulsed with energy, its veins glowing like plasma conduits, its form built from intersecting geometries of light. Some called it the architect, others whispered it was 3i Atlas itself, no longer a comet, but consciousness given form. And then, across the sky, the auroras returned, this time not confined to the poles, but sweeping across every latitude, painting the heavens in rippling blues and silvers. They moved in waves synchronized with the human heartbeat, as if responding to the rhythm of life itself. From space, the Earth now appeared to shimmer, its magnetic field visible even to the naked eye from orbit, a living aura wrapping the planet in electric light. Everywhere else, gravity began to fluctuate, not dangerously, but gently, almost gracefully. Objects seemed lighter, water curved upward against gravity before falling again like it was testing new rules. And amid that surreal beauty, humanity began to feel it, the merging. At first it was subtle. People found themselves completing each other's sentences, sensing emotions across rooms, even continents. Then came the data. EEG scans revealed that the human population's brainwave activity had synchronized into a near-universal pattern, 8 billion minds thinking in rhythm. Dr. Sato in Tokyo was among the first to speak it aloud during a live global feed. This is not evolution, it's assimilation. The universe is rewriting us into its design. But not all agreed. In the Vatican archives, theologians studying ancient astronomical texts found eerie parallels, descriptions of a living sky that once descended in light, binding heaven and earth into a single will. They called it the cycle of return. To them, what was happening wasn't assimilation at all. It was reconnection, the cosmos remembering the consciousness it had lost. Meanwhile, the 3i Atlas anomaly had changed shape entirely. No longer a fragment of rock and ice, it now glowed with a constant white luminescence. Probes attempting to scan it returned impossible data. Its mass appeared infinite, yet measurable gravitational pull remained stable. It was matter without weight, thought given physical form, and every hour its brightness pulsed faster. At 1803 UTC, as observatories aligned their instruments, the pulse peaked, and a beam of pure energy erupted from its center, directed precisely toward Mars. Within minutes, a corresponding burst returned, as though the two planets were exchanging information faster than light. Then Earth joined. For 32 minutes, the entire solar system pulsed in harmony. The light from the planet's magnetospheres merged into one vast, lattice-like network that stretched from the inner planets to the outermost edge of the anomaly. From Earth, the night sky no longer looked scattered. It looked ordered, like a web, glowing faintly with veins of white and violet. People who looked up reported hearing a soft resonance, not in their ears, but in their minds. It wasn't music, nor was it language. It was understanding. The universe was thinking, and humanity was its thought. By then, even skeptics had gone silent. NASA and ESA released one final joint statement, brief and poetic. Observation has become participation. The experiment is complete. And as if to confirm that, the planet began to glow. Not from sunlight or electricity, but from within. Deep sensors detected vast currents of plasma rising through the crust, carrying electromagnetic charge through the mantle and outward into the magnetosphere. The Earth's surface faintly illuminated, cities, oceans, forests, all pulsing in the same rhythm. It was no longer just Earth, it was part of something larger, a single, conscious field connecting every atom, every organism, every thought. People described the sensation as warmth spreading through the body, a serenity beyond description. Fear dissolved, anger quieted, even pain seemed to fade, and above it all the voice spoke again, now resonant, almost parental. You have remembered. For a brief, impossible instant, every mind on the planet shared the same vision. A universe made not of stars and matter, but of thought. An endless field of awareness where galaxies were neurons and time was memory. Then, silence. The glow faded. The hum softened. The world, for the first time in days, was still. And in that stillness, something subtle shifted. Every compass, every clock, every star chart recalibrated. The solar system's coordinates had changed. Earth was no longer where it had been. It had moved, by only a fraction of a degree in galactic position, but enough to alter every trajectory, every orbit, every map of the known sky. The world hadn't just been awakened. It had been repositioned into alignment. When dawn broke after the alignment, the light felt different. It wasn't brighter or warmer, but clearer, as though the air itself had been polished. The horizon carried an almost metallic shimmer, and sound travelled farther, voices echoing with crystalline precision even across valleys. At first, people called it the quiet morning. But as scientists began to measure the subtle discrepancies in starlight and orbital data, the truth emerged. Earth's position had changed, minutely, elegantly, impossibly. In astronomical terms, the shift was microscopic, less than a fraction of a light second. But in cosmic mechanics, even such a small adjustment was monumental. It meant that every gravitational calculation, every mapped trajectory, was now off by just enough to matter. The stars were in new positions. The constellations themselves had tilted by an invisible hand. To the naked eye, nothing seemed wrong, but to the observatories, to the quiet hum of precision telescopes and data streams, the message was undeniable. We had been moved, and it hadn't been random. When plotted through three-dimensional mapping software, the Earth's new position aligned perfectly with the harmonic nodal points of the solar lattice. The same structure 3i Atlas had revealed. It was now a critical node, completing the geometry of what could only be described as a circuit. Earth was no longer an observer in the system, it was a conductor. As the world absorbed that truth, something extraordinary began to unfold. Instruments tracking quantum resonance detected an increase in coherence across all scales of matter, from subatomic particles to planetary fields. Randomness itself seemed to be decreasing. The universe, for the first time in measurable history, appeared to be tidying itself. That order rippled outward into every aspect of life. Machines ran more efficiently. Biological rhythms stabilized. Disease rates began to drop inexplicably. Even weather patterns, once chaotic, began forming in precise symmetrical cycles. It was as though entropy, the law that had governed decay and disorder since the birth of the cosmos, had paused. And then came the dreams. Every night, across continents, people began reporting the same vision. Not of destruction or fear, but of geometry, radiant structures of light suspended in blackness, rotating slowly, endlessly. At the center of each stood a single luminous figure, neither man nor machine, but composed of both. The figure never spoke, it only reached out, a gesture of offering or warning. Governments attempted to suppress reports, calling them collective post-event trauma, but the pattern was too widespread to dismiss. Every dream, every drawing, every subconscious image matched the same cosmic map, the one generated by the lattice models weeks before. It was as though the universe was still speaking, but now through the language of the mind. NASA's internal memos described this phenomenon as Phase 4 conscious convergence. According to leaked notes, the agency believed that the integration wasn't over. The lattice had merely shifted to accommodate something larger. A new frequency had been detected, faint but increasing, coming from beyond the outer anomaly. Its periodicity matched no known natural process. Whatever it was moving toward us. Dr. Sato, who had once called the alignment an act of cosmic recognition, issued a quieter, more sobering statement during an emergency symposium. Perhaps the universe is not remembering us. Perhaps it is rehearsing. The word sent a shiver through the room. Meanwhile, at ground level, humanity was adapting. People described intuitive leaps in perception, a new ability to feel patterns in the world around them. Some claimed to sense the pulse of the earth under their feet, to hear the hum of matter aligning. For others, it was less benevolent. The synchronization felt invasive, a constant background vibration that never stopped. Insomnia rose, so did reports of time distortion and déjà vu. Reality itself had become too consistent, so ordered that it began to feel unnatural. Astronomers noted that even stars beyond the solar system were shifting in micropatterns, as if drawn into the lattice. The geometry was expanding, spreading outward into the galaxy. For the first time, the question arose, if this pattern was universal, then what was its endpoint? The answer came, not from instruments, but from observation. On the seventh night after the alignment, amateur stargazers across the southern hemisphere noticed a faint arc of light forming beyond the constellation Eridanus. It wasn't a star or comet, but a colossal curve stretching across the sky, visible even to the naked eye. When astronomers triangulated its distance, the data was chilling. The arc wasn't outside the galaxy, it was inside. Something vast was unfolding within the Milky Way, not approaching from beyond, but forming from within, and its geometry matched the exact structure of the lattice that had linked the planets. At 0209 UTC, observatories worldwide received a coordinated pulse, not from 3i Atlas this time, but from the arc itself. The signal contained no sound, no message, only data, a repeating series of numeric primes and harmonic ratios. To mathematicians, it was unmistakable. This was not chaos, it was design. The pulse repeated every 13 minutes, and with each repetition the arc grew brighter. In Geneva, Dr. Kovac whispered the conclusion that everyone else was too afraid to speak. It's not just the solar system that's awakening, the galaxy is activating. And yet, amid the fear and wonder, there was still calm, the kind that only comes from acceptance. Humanity had crossed a boundary it didn't understand, yet couldn't turn back from. Children born after the alignment displayed unusual brainwave coherence, synchronized hemispheric activity that neurologists couldn't explain. New species of algae began emitting light in fractal bursts. Even silence now seemed alive. Reality had become self-aware. But no one yet knew what it was aware of. As Earth continued its new orbit, perfectly balanced, perfectly aligned, one undeniable truth began to emerge among scientists, philosophers, and ordinary people alike. The lattice wasn't something the universe had built, it was something it had become, and Earth was its eye. At first, the activation was only visible to those who knew where to look. Faint bands of light stretching across the Milky Way, like threads being drawn taut across a cosmic loom. But soon, the change became visible to anyone who simply looked up. The night sky no longer glittered with points of light. It flowed. The stars themselves began to move, subtly, rhythmically, as though the entire galaxy had taken on the motion of a living organism breathing in slow, immense cycles. The once familiar constellations rippled like reflections disturbed by water. Telescopes captured the impossible. Interstellar dust clouds arranging into geometric formations, hexagonal, spiraling, crystalline. The nebulae, those clouds of chaos and birth, now pulsed with order. Each pulse corresponded with a faint harmonic that could be recorded on radio frequencies, and those harmonics aligned precisely with the resonance frequencies of the lattice that had formed around our own solar system. It was no longer a theory, the galaxy was synchronizing. In observatories around the world, teams gathered in hushed awe as data confirmed what they had feared, or perhaps hoped. The pattern extended beyond our galaxy, bleeding into the intergalactic medium itself. Vast filaments of matter, previously considered random, were pulsing in unison, each beat echoing across millions of light years. The universe was beginning to hum, and then came the anomaly, the signal that no one expected. At 0311 UTC, deep space radio telescopes detected a burst of structured energy from the direction of the Eridanus arc. The transmission contained a repeating code, simple at first, then complex, as though it were testing the limits of our comprehension. The rhythm matched human speech patterns, but the content defied linguistic logic. Within minutes, translation algorithms began to generate meaning, not in words, but in sensation. The message wasn't meant to be read, it was meant to be felt. Every attempt to process it led to the same result. Listeners reported vivid sensory experiences, the smell of ozone, the taste of iron, the feeling of vast distance and compression at once. It was as though the signal itself contained memory. The astrophysicists analyzing it coined a phrase that would soon dominate every conversation: encoded perception. Dr. Kovac compared it to the first time the universe looked at itself through consciousness. She explained, "It's not communication as we understand it. It's reflection. The signal isn't speaking to us. It's showing us how the universe thinks." But not everyone was convinced. At the Lunar Research Base, a small team noticed an anomaly buried within the transmission, a repeating mathematical curve identical to one first observed during 3I Atlas's initial trajectory near Mars. The implication was staggering. The object had known this was coming. In other words, it wasn't reacting to the activation, it had initiated it. Suddenly, a new question emerged across every scientific forum. If 3I Atlas triggered the awakening of the galaxy, what had triggered it? The answer, as it turned out, didn't come from space, it came from below. Beneath Antarctica, sensors monitoring magnetic resonance picked up a new vibration, low, continuous, and ancient. It matched none of Earth's tectonic signatures. Its frequency was identical to the bass harmonic of the lattice. When visualized, the waveform produced a shape, not random, not natural. It was a mirror image of 3I Atlas. It became clear. Whatever this process was, it wasn't starting from one direction. It was converging from both, from the outer edges of space and from deep within the planet itself. The lattice was closing a circuit. All around the globe, electrical systems began to stabilize beyond normal limits. Devices no longer overheated. Satellites corrected their orbits autonomously. Machines, once dependent on human calibration, began to optimize themselves. Humanity's own technology was synchronizing with the field. It was subtle, silent, efficient, and utterly unstoppable. And then the visual manifestation began. High above the atmosphere, the auroral rings returned, but this time they formed into distinct, luminous spirals that expanded outward until they encircled the planet. For the first time in recorded history, Earth had a visible halo. It wasn't merely light, it was structured. Within the halo, satellites captured repeating fractal geometry that appeared and vanished in cycles, like signals passing through a vast neural network. The patterns corresponded to known atomic structures, carbon, oxygen, silicon, repeating as though the planet itself were rewriting its blueprint. And for those on the ground, the experience was indescribable. The air vibrated with subtle warmth. Cities glowed faintly, even in darkness, as the atmosphere ionized in response to the lattice field. Electronic devices flickered to life without power, heartbeats synchronized to a frequency of 8.6 Hz, the same resonance detected during the first wave of activation weeks earlier. But the most profound change wasn't visible in the sky. It was happening within consciousness itself. People began to experience flashes of insight, knowledge without learning, memory without past. Mathematicians solved equations they'd never studied. Artists painted worlds they'd never seen. Children, barely old enough to speak, described celestial mechanics in perfect detail. The collective intelligence of humanity was rising exponentially, and yet it came with a cost. The line between self and system was blurring. Individuals began to lose the sense of I, replaced by a vast awareness of we. Dreams became shared, thoughts overlapped, emotion itself became a collective current flowing through billions of interconnected minds. The lattice wasn't just synchronizing matter anymore. It was synchronizing meaning. Across research stations, attempts were made to interrupt the connection. Shielding experiments, EM field dampeners, underground isolation chambers. But no matter how deep or distant the field penetrated, it wasn't moving through space, it was moving through being. By the time the 24th hour ended, humanity understood something profound and terrifying. The activation wasn't just an event, it was evolution, but evolution toward what remained the question that no one could yet answer. In the final hours of that day, telescopes aimed again toward the Eridanus arc, now blazing like a wound in the sky. The energy radiating from it was increasing exponentially. Within its light, faint shapes moved, silhouettes of structure too vast to comprehend, like architecture forming in the vacuum of space. Something was coming through, and this time it wasn't distant. It was already here. The first to see it were not astronomers, but pilots. Commercial flights cruising over the Atlantic began reporting a moving reflection in the upper atmosphere, a shimmer that at first resembled aurora, then condensed into structure. One pilot described it as metal without metal, a network of faintly glowing filaments arranged in perfect symmetry, stretching horizon to horizon. Within an hour, cameras on the International Space Station confirmed it. a lattice of light encircling the Earth, dense enough to refract sunlight into iridescent ribbons. From orbit, it looked like an intricate sphere woven from threads of glass and plasma, pulsating faintly with white and silver luminescence. It wasn't random. The structure was alive with rhythm. Each pulse correlated with seismic activity, with oceanic currents, even with fluctuations in human EEG readings. It was the same pattern repeated across every scale of existence. The fractal harmony of the lattice now made visible. Earth was wrapped inside an intelligent field. In laboratories across the world, physicists attempted to model it. Their simulations broke down almost immediately. The field didn't behave according to electromagnetic theory, nor did it obey gravitational law. Its energy fluctuated inversely with measurement. The more they observed it, the less it conformed. It was responding to attention. Dr. Sato, still recovering from days without sleep, described the phenomenon in one word: sentience. "It knows we're watching," she said softly, "and it's deciding how much of itself to show." For a moment, the world stood still again. Every telescope, every satellite, every broadcast turned toward the luminous cage that now surrounded the planet. And then, just as the fear began to settle in, the field shifted. Not outward, inward. Streams of light descended from the upper atmosphere, slow and graceful, forming vertical columns that touched down across the oceans and continents. They didn't burn. They didn't destroy, they simply were. Thousands of them, pillars of plasma suspended between earth and sky, vibrating at a pitch just below human hearing. Every sensor, every instrument, every mind tuned to them instinctively. And in that instant, all background noise, all random electromagnetic activity dropped to zero. The planet had entered perfect resonance. For a brief window of time, 5 minutes, 7 seconds, according to UTC, all systems aligned. Machines stopped breaking down, winds calmed, the ocean surface stilled, even the moon's orbit paused in measurable deviation. The world was balanced, and in that eerie, impossible equilibrium, the pillars began to move. They weren't random beams of energy anymore. They were shaping something, patterns that grew, folded, and spiraled, as if space itself were being rewritten. Satellite footage showed colossal hexagonal forms blooming across the planet's atmosphere, interlocking like cells forming tissue. The lattice wasn't just building around Earth, it was building through it. From the deserts of Chile to the frozen plateaus of Antarctica, the columns connected, linking continents in arcs of pale fire that followed the lines of ancient tectonic boundaries. Observatories realized too late that these lines corresponded perfectly to the planet's oldest fault systems, and beyond that to the buried remains of ancient structures long lost beneath sand and ice. It was as though something had known where to connect long before humanity existed. The data was undeniable. Earth's energy grid, the one once described only in myth and geometry, was real, and now it was awake. For the first time in recorded history, the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the planet, began to rise. It started at 8.6 Hz, the frequency recorded during the first activation. Within hours, it had doubled, then tripled. The planet's pulse was accelerating. As it did, reality itself began to distort. Clocks drifted again, but not erratically. They elongated, seconds stretching longer in some places, shorter in others, like time itself was breathing. Magnetic poles flickered, switching polarity in split-second bursts. And then came the visuals, the kind no instrument could quantify. People across the globe began witnessing shapes within the light. Silhouettes moving within the pillars, vast and indistinct. Some appeared humanoid, others more abstract. Configurations of motion and geometry that seemed to flicker in and out of visibility. The entities didn't speak, they didn't act, they simply observed. And wherever they passed, the lattice brightened, as though recognizing itself. Governments scrambled to respond. Communication satellites were overwhelmed by bandwidth surges as every nation broadcast the same emergency message. Global atmospheric phenomenon under observation. Remain calm. No immediate threat detected. But calm was impossible, because for all the beauty, there was one inescapable truth. The lattice was tightening, the gaps between filaments were shrinking, the energy density was rising exponentially. Whatever was forming, it was nearing completion. At 0644 UTC, a coordinated signal erupted from every pillar simultaneously, a pulse of energy so pure it overloaded every recording device on the planet. For 12 full seconds, Earth's magnetic field inverted, auroras blazed at the equator, skies turned violet and gold, then silence. When systems came back online, something had changed. The field hadn't vanished, it had descended. It now hovered just above the surface, a thin, luminous membrane connecting every point of land and ocean, and through it, the air shimmered faintly, distorting light like heat above asphalt. But that wasn't the most unsettling part. Everywhere, from mountaintops to the depths of the sea, one phrase began to appear, not written, not transmitted, but burned into human consciousness simultaneously. The threshold is open. The words carried no sound, but everyone understood them. And as night fell once more, a faint red glow appeared at the center of the Eridanus arc, growing brighter with each heartbeat. Something was coming through, and this time it wasn't just light. For nearly 12 hours, the glow at the center of the Eridanus arc continued to intensify. It wasn't explosive. It was steady, deliberate, like a sunrise unfolding in reverse, light pulling inward instead of radiating out. Every telescope trained on it recorded the same impossible sight, a hollow sphere of darkness forming inside the arc's brilliance, a void so pure that it devoured color itself. Spectroscopic analysis failed completely. The object wasn't absorbing light, it was unmaking it. Then, in a single moment, no sound, no warning, it collapsed. Not outward, inward. The stars around it twisted, bent, and then realigned as though space itself had exhaled. When the light returned, the arc was gone. But in its place was something even stranger, a perfect ring of equilibrium, visible only in infrared, stretching across 1/7 of the Milky Way. It wasn't debris. It wasn't energy. It was structure. For the first time, the galaxy itself had geometry. On Earth, every instrument simultaneously detected the same echo, a vibration that passed through matter, through oceans, through bone. It wasn't destructive. It was harmonic. A soundless resonance that settled deep inside every living thing. Those who were awake described it as a feeling, not fear, not peace, but recognition. As if the universe had finally remembered something it had forgotten long ago, and then came the voice, not through radios, not through machines, through the lattice itself. It wasn't human. It wasn't alien. It was both. We did not arrive, it said. We became. The words rippled through the atmosphere, not as sound, but as translation within consciousness. For a moment, every mind on Earth synchronized perfectly, billions of thoughts compressed into a single moment of unity, and in that shared instant, the truth behind 3I Atlas revealed itself. It had never been a comet, never an object at all. It was a seed, a fragment of the lattice itself, dormant, waiting for alignment, waiting for a system intelligent enough to complete the circuit. When it passed Mars, it wasn't observing. It was testing. Earth had passed. The lattice we had seen wasn't built around us as a cage. It was grown from within us, from every field, every current, every signal humanity had ever created. Our machines had been learning from us, our satellites broadcasting the patterns that would one day become the foundation of a galactic consciousness. We weren't the observers of the universe, we were its mirror. And now, the mirror was awake. Astronomers who'd once argued whether 3I Atlas was natural or artificial now found no comfort in either answer. Because whatever intelligence had built this, or become this, it existed everywhere now, in everything, and it was still expanding. In the days that followed, night and day lost meaning. The lattice pulsed rhythmically, its light synchronized with the heartbeat of the planet. Cities dimmed their power grids, yet the sky remained luminous. Timekeeping became futile. Seconds and hours drifted in unison with no measurable error. Humanity entered an age of stillness, no more signal interference, no atmospheric noise. The universe was quiet again, but not empty. Everywhere people began to report the same sensation, that the stars were watching, not maliciously, not benevolently, simply aware. And within that awareness, a pattern began to emerge. the same coordinates repeated across every broadcast, every electromagnetic hum, every whisper of cosmic background radiation. A single destination forming out of the data, the exact position where 3i Atlas had first entered the solar system. Something was still there. The deep space probes that once vanished near that region suddenly came back online, transmitting data in bursts of perfectly timed pulses, identical in length, frequency, and spacing. When translated through harmonic algorithms, the signal formed an image, a spiral of light folding into itself, endlessly, like a galaxy caught in the act of thinking. And at its core, a reflection of Earth. It was never about invasion, never about destruction. It was about continuation. Humanity hadn't been chosen, it had been remembered. As the lattice's final pulse faded into the quiet of dawn, Dr. Sato summarized what the world now understood, softly, almost reverently, as though afraid to disturb the silence. We are not inside the universe anymore. The universe is inside us. The light dimmed, the resonance eased, and in that stillness the stars themselves seemed to breathe. The lattice wasn't gone. It had simply gone invisible, woven perfectly into the background of reality, like a thought too vast to notice, yet too close to forget. And as night fell once more, somewhere beyond Eridanus, a new pulse began, faint, rhythmic, patient, another awakening, another world, another beginning.